Some of you are worried about World War III. It's already here. You're in the middle of a frequency war. Timelines are all movable. Timeline possibilities are there for all of us. We can speed things up or we can slow things down depending on what we need, what we're ready for. We're at the beginning of a whole new world. The future human connects the dots from now to decades ahead and gives you a map. I think we're there. Disease actually said that many of us are floating above our bodies, but we don't realize we are. They say that we're coming into a time of cosmic consciousness, which is understanding our place in the universe. We're coming into a period where all that starts to get increasingly disclosed. This splitting of the worlds is a little bit like multiple dimensions of reality happening at once. This is where black and white thinking starts to fall apart. Multi-dimensionality is the world that we live in. The Z's have said this old control system that we have been living under for a long time, it's going to get dismantled. I just recorded the April energy update, and one of the themes referred to is when I channel my guides, the Z's, they will go wherever they're asked to go and wherever directed. So I noticed doing readings for many, many years, the questioner was a huge influence on the answer, huge influence. And so over the years, they've been talking about these times that we're in. They said in 2016 in a workshop in London, a closing message that I did at the end of the workshop, they said that 2017 to 2024 were going to literally change the planet and be the setup to a whole new world. And at the time, I remember thinking, oh, okay, that's interesting. But, lo and behold, now we've lived through it, particularly 2020 to 2023. You go, oh, I see. Nothing is quite as it was, which is what they had all been saying for a long time. But I couldn't see it tangibly, and I couldn't, just as a human being, go, okay, what's this going to look like? So it's interesting the book had the delay because Regina and I said the book is coming out now in early 2025, and it's almost more, how do I put it? The evidence of what some of the book is talking about is the seeds of it are already here, and we're already seeing some of these things. For me, the long-term predictions are interesting because you can't ever prove a long-term prediction. And also, when I surrender to being the channeler, which is different to me as an intuitive guide, when you surrender to being a channeler, it's kind of none of my business what happens in those conversations. So it's an interesting thing to... I had a question for myself of, am I comfortable having my name on something I can't necessarily vouch for or prove, particularly because it's going so far out? And I've kind of made peace with it. I also have a very light touch around the book because it's not my information. It came through my guides. So there are things in the book that I have a relationship to and can understand, and there are things in the book that I am going to be curious to see how things play out. But what I will say, and they say this in the book, and this is what I understand as someone who is an intuitive and can kind of see future timelines. Timelines are all movable. So for you, Amrit, in your life, there will be a destiny path that you are on. You will have a mission as a soul, which you are clearly fulfilling. And then there will be timeline opportunities as to which vibration you get to at which stages of your life. And there will be all influences around you that will combine to that. So for example, I know often in the spiritual community, people will say, oh, I want to get to the highest timeline, or I want to become the most enlightened. And actually, that's not always the best choice for you. You might be in a scenario with a group of people that you have contracted to go through something with for the next decade. So if you suddenly went into your highest state of enlightenment, you would unhook from all of them because that's not where they're going. And actually, you going through that 10 years with them is going to be hugely important for your healing, your evolution, and also your soul. And it's what you came here for. So timeline possibilities are there for all of us. We can speed things up or we can slow things down depending on what we need, what we're ready for, what the people around us that we're contracted to need. So with the book, what I'm aware of, or what I feel about the book, is it gives us a chance to go into something so future bound in ourselves. And I think less make decisions about the future and what might happen in 20, 30 years. But instead, it starts to put you into your own future timeline. And you start to travel with the book. I know Regina and I, as human beings, it took us weeks to recover, because it was like going into a time tunnel of the future for a week, which I'd never done so intensively. And especially because the topics were so broad, and some of the topics are very dense. There's a lot of discussion about a lot of low vibration stuff on the planet too. So it's not unicorns and rainbows. It's not, here's how to manifest your dream life partner. It's not that book. It's something else. And so I kind of feel like the timing of the book being delayed and coming out now was divine. And I've noticed people who are experiencing the book, as you said, talk about this uplifting frequency. It gives them hope for the future, I think, because it lays out a long track of time. And I think right now on Earth, there are so many alarmist agendas, alarmist news headlines. There are true things to be concerned about that are going on the planet too. And I think for a lot of people, they go to... understandably, existential crisis, fear of death. Is the planet going to survive? Is the human race going to survive? So I think when all of that comes into your frequency, you immediately lower. We immediately go down. We go into fear. We go into contraction. This book doesn't let you live there because it takes you into some of the very things you may be afraid about. And it has a very interesting cosmic conversation about what those things are, why they might be happening, and what some of the future possible outcomes of those things are, all guided by Regina, who has kind of seen it all, heard it all, researched it all. So she told me she was hungry to have a conversation like this with the Z's, who she has interviewed many times over a decade. So I really feel like we're at the beginning of a whole new world, and we're still in the early stages of it. But I think what the future human does is, for me, it kind of connects the dots from now to decades ahead and gives you a map. For me, it gave me a sense of what's coming in a way that I didn't previously have.
Yeah, what's present for me was a book like this, which actually does face some of the real big challenges in terms of, war, politics, like education, medicine, like the future of it head on, but then also puts it into this context, which is like, and it's all kind of by design, is really interesting because it's not lost on me that, like you referenced media, at the moment there's a lot of bad news media that gets pummeled into us subconsciously and subliminally. And I think in this conversation between yourself and myself, combined audience is very clear on, our awareness also creates our reality, right? I think that's not a conversation that's alien to anybody that's tuning into this podcast. And so from that space, noticing the frequency that the book is carrying, like you said, took you a couple of weeks to recover from even just, like, whoa, this little time portal that's happened, is quite profound, because having that in your awareness then creates, like, within everybody's awareness, a very different shift for a palpable reality. And it sort of is not just, in some ways, yes, potentially it could be predicting, but also it could be influencing a much more graceful outcome. Your thoughts?
I love that you say that, because I gave private readings for 15 years, from 2004 to 2019, and it gave me a real understanding of why we go to a private reading with an intuitive or a psychic or a tarot reader or whatever the form is. Someone once said to me, "Oh, but I don't want to know my future." And I said, that's not what you're going for. What you're actually going for is to work with your future. And if something is presented to you as, "Oh, next year I see this is going to happen for you," you and your soul immediately go into relationship with it. And you either move toward it, or you go, "Oh God, I don't want that to happen. I'd better do a bit more healing on heartbreak, because no, I don't want to manifest 2 more toxic partners, thank you." Which means there's some work to do here, right? So, I have always understood that is how it works. And I've understood, I did thousands and thousands of private readings. So I had a front row seat to see this phenomena of when you start to enter into that. And I still enjoy readings from good intuitives, even though I can channel for myself any day. I'm a believer in self-growth, and I'm a believer in the growth process. And much as some people would swear by a therapist, I also, because of my design and what I do for a living, it's important for me to check in with intuitive people as well as I go through my year and my process, in case there are any blind spots or things that I can't get through my own guides. So I love that you bring that up, because that to me was the most empowering thing about the future human. And when I was having a little talk with myself before it came out, I was like, are you comfortable? Because you know how it is. When you put work out into the world, there's always some kickback. There's always people with opinions. And, I don't normally look at comments anymore for obvious reasons. It's just, I have students in courses who I'm in dialogue with and all that, but general comments on the internet, no. But there was one comment that came my way, and it was very interesting because I saw it, it was relayed to me, and someone had completely misinterpreted something in the book and then blamed me for it. And because I read the comment, I was like, oh, wow, you did not understand what they were saying. You've taken what they were saying, melded it with your worst fear, and then blamed me. So I was like, okay, yeah, this is definitely, that was where I kind of went, yep, I understand that's how you're using it. But what I'm actually hearing from most people is it's putting them into their own future reality, and it's giving them an empowering through line for the future. And that's very important, because we don't hear enough of that. And to your point about media, how you know that current day media is low vibration is it is not about transformation. For example, cancel culture is about condemnation, not transformation. And sure, cancel culture, there might be some figures in cancel culture where you go, whoa, the things that they have done really do need to see them kind of put over here, and they need to reflect on their behavior, and that's different. But cancel culture is very different to transformation culture, because there are many people who I've heard be chastised by the media for something they said 20 years ago. Well, there are things all of us would have said 20 years ago that were more appropriate to the culture 20 years ago that now we've grown out of. So again, you see the media doing this baiting, attacking, judging game. You see the media wanting to influence low vibrations inside all of us. A target piece on a person will tell you how to feel about them. It doesn't just give you facts about them. It uses sentences that are very emotional to make you go, yeah, I'm going to hate that person too. So the media is part of our dumbing down program. It's part of what keeps us in the low vibration and the fear. And what the future human kind of alludes to is we're moving into a transformation time. And I do think the internet is a huge part of that. I think the fact that so many voices and so many learnings can come to us now from each other through the internet. And there are so many platforms like yours, or, I'm one of many like you doing work like this, where there is a desire for something different. And that's what we're seeing. But up until now, there has still been this stranglehold on what's allowed in the mainstream, and what the Z's talk about in the book. And I think what we're seeing is these next few years, we're going to see a real flip around that. It's going to be that more of the, shall we say, transformational or possible energies are going to be more visible on the planet and more raised to the surface. And some of the control is going to really struggle to hold on to the old narrative, the old way of being, which was keep people small, keep people afraid, keep people compliant.
Inspired Soul, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you that are subscribed to this podcast. Thank you so much for your incredible love and support. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please take a moment, hit that button, hit the bell notification icon. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to this channel. Thank you so much in advance for your love and support, and supporting us in championing love, positivity, and wisdom around the planet through your subscription. Thank you. I mean, the book does really take on this theme of control and power head on. in many ways. It seems like what was previously a pyramid is turning into a flat line in very many ways. This whole hierarchical structure is just being challenged into like flattening it out into one, I don't know, flat circle. I don't know what the shape is for the future. Maybe you could allude it. But it's really this, it's elements of control that have previously been there. It's challenging that people can very much and see that these no longer serve, but that's only going to become even more apparent. Am I right in sort of understanding that's the next kind of between now and 2032? Like really that's this window where things are really effervescing to the top, or is it even beyond that? Yeah.
Well, I don't know about you. I think we're there. You only have to look around to see the, how do we put it? Well, I'll back up a second. So the Z's always said for years, they said as consciousness continues to rise and rises very fast, you are going to see more of the old rising too and attempting to stop progression, attempting to stop evolution. And so if you just look at what we're seeing worldwide, and a lot of our focus, I think, goes towards world leadership, government, because up until now, that has been the power system in which we are all held. And we're supported through it in many ways. You know, the Z's have always said, you say you want it all to fall down overnight, but you really don't want that, because if it all falls down overnight, you won't survive. So they said, you know, that your systems are holding you in place, and what needs to happen is a slow shift back into a different way of us working as a people. So I think many of us have been, I find it interesting whenever you see a narrative that wants us to blame ourselves for everything that's happening on the planet. You know, I saw a movie that had a real agenda to it, I felt, and at the end of it, it was like, well, humans have messed up the planet. And I was like, interesting, because actually, if you think about it, most of us are doing what we are allowed to do or what we are told to do. And there is an authority above us that tells us what we're allowed and what we're told. And like many, I grew up not really seeing that. I grew up thinking, you know, I grew up just growing up, and I found spirituality before I started to become more aware of some of the underpinnings of society that will actually limit our spiritual growth. So this is that moment. This is that moment where it's all beginning to go head to head. And so you are seeing this rise up of higher consciousness. So that would be positive media, transformation culture, people being more in their hearts, people becoming more emotionally aware, emotionally literate, people doing things on behalf of the planet or different groups of people who are marginalized or who have not been served. So there is this actual push within people to balance everything more than it has been. But equally, we're seeing this power game happen at the top that wants to take us back 50 to 100 years, which is exactly what the Z's said would happen years and years ago. But it's interesting seeing it play out now. And they've said that, you know, we will, it won't last. It will fight hard. It will kick. It will scream. The question is, how far do we have to go down that path before it snaps and goes the other way? But it will go the other way. The question is, how long will it take? And the other thing they've said, and the reason I'm going to share this is, I think when I say some of this stuff, people get concerned, understandably, because it's intense. It's an intense topic. There is often this fear of, well, how do we do anything? How do we have any of the power? And that's why I think people start to think they're doomed, because there is this sense of, oh, we don't have any power, we don't have any control, we don't have any influence. And the Z's are like, no, you do. You absolutely do. And it's interesting, when I spoke to Pam Gregory a couple of weeks ago, and I know you have had Pam on your show, and she's wonderful. She was telling me about some of the uprisings that she was reporting on around the world, and I hadn't heard some of that at the time. But again, there's increasing evidence of people's spirit and people's life force rising up above anything that might be negatively or inappropriately holding it down or suppressing it. So it is a very tricky time, and the Z's said in about 2020 or 2021, I have a members community called The Portal, and every month I go live in there. And in one of those monthly sessions, the Z's said, you're in the middle of a frequency war. Some of you are worried about World War III. It's already here. You're already in it, but it doesn't look like how war used to look on the planet. You're in the middle of a frequency war. And so, even me using the word war is tricky, because I know people watching this, people listening to this, we have a programmed response where we go, understandably, and it's generational and it's cultural and it's energetic. It's in the energy field of the planet. So that was why I said to Regina before we embarked on this book, I said, I'm happy to go through all these topics with you. I said, however, I have no interest in this book being disempowering. I said, and that's not what I'm here for. That's not my mission. And she said, no, absolutely. I also want this to put power into people's hands rather than disempower them. So, that's how I approach these topics. Because I've definitely touched on many of these things over the years, but this is perhaps the most in-depth channeled information I've ever done in those areas. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to double click on a particular point that was in the book that really I think is very helpful, and I was hoping to chat to you about today, even if briefly, just to sort of memorialize this part of the book in a podcast. The nature of transformation, because you're referring to transformative media, and there's this really beautiful point, which is hard to articulate, but the Z's did such an amazing job of 1 week you'll be feeling super vibe in it. Like you're just like, dude, I've transformed and I'm like here. And it's like, yes. And then like 2 weeks later, you're just like, oh, like what? I thought I just worked through all of that. Yeah. And I'm paraphrasing now, but it was very, as of this point, but it was very much like, it's okay that happens, because actually you've had this sort of dive charge in an upwards direction. You've had this vertical like upwards dive charge, which sort of does increase your frequency, which does create a shift. But then it's only normal that everything else around you starts to find its homeostasis around it. And there's an adjustment that's actually happening. And I think so many of us can be so disheartened when that happens. It's like, poof, I get it. And then it's like, oh, but it doesn't seem like I actually do. And it's like you go through this phase and this period, but recognizing that actually, no, that did happen. And the rest of you is now coming to an equilibrium. And in fact, some ways, the way that I'm again paraphrasing, that's coming to its surface because you've moved up so hard and fast that this has now come up ready to be scraped off the top. So the substrate actually elevates as a whole. I mean, that for me just is such an important point as we start to do this work through this time. I just wanted to reflect on that with you for a moment.
I love that you bring this up because, I came from a time where I was going to self-growth workshops. I started studying self-growth and spirituality when I was 16, but in my early 20s, I started going to a lot of self-growth workshops. And there used to be this thing, it's like the workshop hangover. You get the workshop high, and you're like, oh my God, this is the best 3 days of my life, because you've gone through this powerful, when you put people in a community group with the right leader for them, because of course you can go to some disastrous self-growth workshops as well if the person who is the conduit or the group that you're with don't necessarily have some kind of harmony. You can have this powerful workshop high, and then you can return to your life and feel like things have crashed. This is actually the ascension process. This is the way it works. But most of us at that time were mind trained to go, oh God, why? How did I lose it? Why am I regressing? And the Z's were very helpful for me around that time because they started to explain the process. So, for example, let's take relationships in our life as one area where this shows up. The Z's have spoken a lot about this in the last few years. I think one of the heartbreaks that can happen for people on the spiritual path is when relationships change. And I'm not just talking about, romantic relationships. I'm talking about deep friendships, business relationships that are really healthy, that all of a sudden go, or over a period of time, they lose their connectivity. We as connected beings who are here to connect, and especially if you're here as someone working with consciousness, both for your own healing and evolution, but you're also someone who spends time helping others into that because that's your design or your mission. It's very jarring when disconnection happens with a person that you maybe were attached to or had a really close relationship with. But the Z's have talked about vibrational deselection. They say that a relationship that falls apart, you vibrationally deselected it, or the other person did months before. And it's taken time for it to surface. And so we're going through this, oh no, my friend or my, and I've certainly had some really close friendships in my life over the last 20 years that you think, oh, we're going to be friends forever. And no, it didn't quite play out that way for one reason or another. And the Z's talk about that as an aspect of growth because we have relationships in our life based on connection points. They explained this in a channel a few years ago. For you to have a good relationship with someone, you need to have at least 8 connection points. And a connection point refers to an alignment. So for example, it might be, let's say you have a friend in your life, Amrit, and one of your connection points is they're also a podcast host. Well, that's brilliant for you because in the same way that new parents need other parents to deal with this chaos that they're in, that they've, like, where's the map for parenting? Oh, good. Here are some other people going through this with us. Okay, good. Phew. That's why, so for you, this, let's say you have a friend come into your life last year, and one of the things is they're a podcast host. This is great for you because you get to share this. Not many people, well, I should say that there's a lot of podcasts now, but not that many people will know what it is to run a podcast. So it's comforting for you to get to connect and share with someone about it. And then maybe you also love baseball. They love baseball. Maybe you love being in your heart. They're a very heart-centered person. So this is how your 8 connection points go. And then they say, when you're really close to someone, there are way more than 8. There are lots of connections between you. But let's say next year you wake up and you're like, I'm over baseball and I don't want to run a podcast anymore. I've done it. I've used, and yeah, I'm good. I don't really need to know more about parenting. Or you've moved to a different vibration. And if that other person is like, but I love baseball and I need to be attached to you for it, or I really want to talk to you about podcasts, they will have to find someone else because they still have that need in them and you are no longer fulfilling it. And it's nobody's fault. It's just where you went vibrationally. So I'm using relationships as an example, but I think as we go through the ascension process, you can apply that to many things. I used to love yoga and it was my saving grace for 15 years. And now I can't connect to yoga and I have to go through a grief around that and a loss and a letting go. But don't worry, in a year, you're going to find Qigong. You're going to go, oh, but you have to go through the gap period. You have to go through the grief and the letting go period. And because for us, that involves usually some suffering, some pain, some sadness, lower vibrations, we think, oh, something's going wrong. But it isn't going wrong. It's because you upshifted or expanded. What then happens is your life has to rearrange itself accordingly to support this new vibrational level that you've anchored or that you're anchoring. Because then once that anchors, then you're going to go to the next level. And there's a quote where they said the path of the light worker is constant change. And, that's a slightly painful truth, because, there is the human part of us that wants things to stay safe or,
stability.
But it's true, it's true.
It's, at this point, it's, because so much of the future human is about connection. The 3 big topics you pull through are you've got people and you've got purpose and you've got spirit. As we're going through these vibrational deselection, I think that was, that's profound to just digest that. Thank you for sharing that. From there, reconnection becomes this real piece, right? Like, how do you, as you're vibrationally deselecting things, and maybe for their own reasons, like you said, no judgment, trusting that the connection is coming through to something new, but obviously you're kind of in that Bardo period almost, where things are, things are dying, things are re-emerging. I mean, do you then focus on these three as a bit of a light? Because I feel like these were three lights that were presented through the book consistently, whether it's democracy that's shifting, whether it's, education that's shifting, whether it's Medicare that's shifting, whatever was shifting, it sort of came back to these three principles as sort of like these, ropes to sort of hold on to, which was like people, purpose, spirit.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think it's obviously it would depend for each person on what it is they should or could hold on to as they go through the process. But I can share a couple of things, some of which are personal, and some of which are just what I notice. I think number one, it's really helpful to remember you're in a process, to not let the mind catastrophize or tell you, oh no, this is my new reality. Because I certainly was guilty of that for years. Like, I'd go through this rough period and I'd be thinking, oh no, and I learned to train myself to go, okay, there's some shedding going on here. What I also would do when I was in a period of big change or big loss is I would also start to notice what's new. Because it's very easy for us to go, oh, I'm losing this, or I've lost this, or this is no longer working. Okay, well, what's new? What has come into your life that's new or that you don't recognize from 2 years ago? And when you start to see that, you go, oh, these are my new options. Because sometimes the universe, will go back to the friend example. I do think when you have a deep connection with someone, there is a very necessary letting go process. And depending on whether childhood wounds were into it. I just went through this with a friend recently, actually. And, when I looked at what was inside, because I was completely at peace that we'd kind of changed in our need of each other, let's put it that way. But something wasn't at peace. And what I got was, it's like, oh, this is some childhood abandonment stuff for me. That's the emotion for me that has attached itself to this relationship. And because we were so close and because we so looked out for each other's hearts and minds, and it was a very important relationship to me, especially through a very difficult time in my life a couple of years ago, what I recognized was, the part of the grief that I'm also feeling is like some emotional abandonment. So it was, once I'd seen that, it was easier to go, okay, I have to let this be in my system, and I have to remind myself, okay, I'm dealing with a past feeling. What is my reality today telling me? And when I did that, I suddenly went, oh wow, you've got this new person who came into your life at around about the same time that has become an increasingly close friend. So you start to see that when we lose things, when we're ready to receive something new, the new will come in. But equally, sometimes we have to pick ourselves up off the floor and remind ourselves to be open to the new. There can come a point in your retreat process, your grief, your depression, where it's no longer a natural state for you to be going through those emotions and those feelings. It has become a habit and a pattern. And you have to break yourself out of the pattern. And, when you're really down, that can be very hard. But you start small and you start simple. And it's as simple as going, okay, today I'm going to take a walk around my block for 15 minutes. And that will be a huge success for me, because right now I do not want to leave Netflix. I want my 9th donut. I want my 4th glass of wine. I want to keep reading awful news headlines that make me feel sick, but I can't help it and I can't stop myself. And funny, I've got 3 friends who do the same thing, and they're the ones that call me. And how am I feeding myself vibrationally? And if you're really honest with yourself and you go, oh, hang on a second, I've been reinforcing low vibrations in so many of my choices. Today's success will be that I can take that one step of a 15-minute walk around the block, and that is enough. That is enough. Because if I can do that every day and just increase it every day, I will start to let the light in again. And I'll start to move myself in a different direction. So I think that's where vibrational responsibility kicks in. But, for many overachievers in the spiritual self-growth world, it's really important to allow yourself to fall apart when you feel like you're falling apart, and not try and bypass it, not try and go, well, if I just meditate my way through this, I won't have to feel this emotional abandonment. It's like, no, feel the emotional abandonment. That's going to be the way through. It's not what you'd like to do. It's not the most appealing thing. It's not floating off in a lovely meditation and having a vision of your future life that makes you go, oh, that looks great. No, it's none of that. It's cleaning up what's in here. And it's allowing what's in here that previously couldn't be felt, or we didn't have the bandwidth or the self-support or the support in our life that allowed us to be at a place where we can go, wow, you know what? I'm going to put my hand in here and I'm going to reach down. And that thing when I was 13 that I was in no fit place to deal with, and I had no one around me who could help me deal with it. Now I'm just going to dislodge it a little bit, because if I can just pull that shadow out a little bit more, oh, wow, I get a lot more space. And all of this space that I've just cleared in here over the coming weeks and months is going to turn from wound to life force. It wasn't damaged, it was just dented. It was dented life force. And now I've let it open up again. Now me and the universe are going to find a healthy and new way for that part of my life force that I wasn't in possession of for the last, 30 years is suddenly back with me and in my energy field. So this is going to be new.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines.
He's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing, and Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. Yeah, there's this real slippery piece in and around energy and frequency work, which it just needs a moment, because this conversation is, thank you, is judgment. It's this really trippy sort of thing. Like you said, the type A is like, then, individual which is high achieving, then looks at themselves kind of going through the process and then judges the process. And it just, the way I visualize it, I'd love to get your insights on this, is it just collapses the vibrational, like energy flowing movement field down. The minute a judgment comes in, and it's hard not to judge because you're in this ego-based reality, which is always trying its best to like, oh, this and that and not this and not that, but this judgment piece consistently comes through. And I think in this particular conversation, in light of also Future Human, there's this really, because we're still talking about like, there was this really poetic way where it was like, we're sort of just deselecting now because we've put so much work in over the years as collective human beings and individuals. Things like, and I know we keep coming back to the war piece, but it's just the easiest one to sort of refer to, are like getting deselected out of the collective vibration over the coming years. Like it's just not going to be a thing, We're seeing a lot of it come to the surface on its way out at the moment. But there's like, it's so easy to sort of judge our propensities and habits and the things that sort of emerge in our fields as they do. But as you said, even with your old friend, and then this kind of new space opening up, and it's like, oh, but if you don't judge it, it actually allows things to move and come to their own natural recourse and settling. And I think just that piece, I think, is really important, just to because it really grounds in around a nucleus there, the word judgment.
I love that you bring this up because, again, going back to my 25 years ago in brilliant self-growth workshops, but a different time in the culture. So even though they were brilliant, there was this perception of, well, if you're having a bad feeling, what's your resistance? Like, what's your, why is this? There was a bit of an idea in one group that I attended several workshops in. That was kind of the perception, which is not a perception I ever felt completely aligned with at the time, but I did try it on for size for a while. And the Z's said something about judgment that was perfect for me as a recovering self-judgment person, like many of us. And they said, and this was to a group, they said, if you catch yourself judging yourself, celebrate it. And here's why. Because you caught yourself doing it, which means there is a part of you that is awareness. So there's the part of you that's judgmental ego that comes from a wound, that comes from you were judged by others, so you learned to judge yourself in order to protect yourself feeling the judgment of others. You decided to stop yourself doing the thing that got you in judgment with others so that you didn't have to feel their displeasure and you adopted it in yourself to control yourself, so you didn't do that. But that isn't running the show if you notice you're doing it. And so they said, if you catch yourself judging yourself, celebrate it, because that means you have awareness in there. So sure, there might still be this old judge going, oh, you're terrible, and da-da-da-da-da, and that's not comfortable. But there's also a part of you going, oh, wow, I'm judging myself right now. And this is the bit we want. This is the bit we want to develop. It's neutral, and it just notices behaviors. In much the same way you'd notice bullying behavior in a room where you were in a party and you go, wow, that person's really bullying that person. Can we catch when we're bullying ourselves? And when we catch it, we start to wrap space around it and we no longer believe the truth of it. And it's funny you mentioned war, because I think when I was growing up, there were always some who understood what war was really about, and there were always those pioneers who spoke about it publicly. But more than ever before, we as a culture understand what war is really about. We're often sold a story as people of, oh, these people want to kill you and you're not going to be safe, so let's go and kill them first. And it's never about that. It's usually resources, transfer of power, and it's nothing to do with us. It's nothing to do with us, the people. It's a game that's being played out by, a few in power who are more shadowy than some of the others in power. So I think we're at this point where more people than ever before are aware of that truth. So what's going to be very interesting as we go through the coming years is, as more people become aware of that truth, how is it going to influence what happens next, and how things that have been allowed to play out for decades, and there's been a certain public consciousness about them, that's about to change. So it doesn't necessarily mean it will go away overnight. It probably means it will bring far more chaos in terms of what's going on the planet. But it is moving us towards a place of the spell is broken now for more of us than ever before. And also as people get more compassionate, there's something in the book, I think, where the Z said humans don't want war. That's not actually their design or their desire. But there are a very, very small number on the planet who do, and they're the ones who find ways to get everyone else to say yes to the phenomena.
What does the future of power look like?
It's a very good question, and I wish I could remember what was in the book now, because it's been a little while since I engaged with the material. A lot of it is going to depend on what happens environmentally, and I don't just mean the natural world. I mean a lot of the things that have been done to the planet, some things that we're aware of and some things that we're not. So the future of power, from what the Z's have said, is this old control system that we have been living under for a long time. It's going to get dismantled. And what they have also said is that there are people we will never see or know who are working to dismantle that old control system. And there is also a lot of infighting, because I think this was it's interesting, isn't it, seeing what the general consensus is on the internet, and there is no general consensus, what am I saying? The multiple different ideas and ideologies. And I think some people sometimes go, oh no, there's this really dark agenda and there's this one bad group who are trying to kill us all. And the Z's have always said, oh, it's not one group, it's multiple groups vying for control. And they are going to eat themselves. They said a part of this process is they are going to get in each other's way. That it's not... And it's interesting, they have said that for years and years and years and years whenever that question has come up. And so it's kind of interesting for me when I see that play out. And I think one of the most dangerous things for any of us is having a fixed belief or thinking we know something when we don't really. I've certainly seen that play out online. I did a podcast interview with, may have been Mike Dooley or somebody, and in it I was wearing red sneakers. This was about 2020. And it was the early days of my podcast, so I did still look at comments then to kind of, see how the episodes were landing for people and just get feedback really on how we may or may not improve things. And there was a whole thread about me being Illuminati because of my red sneakers. I didn't know this was a thing. Like I'd never heard of this. But what was so striking about the thread was the first person said it, and then 3 more said it. And then there were things like, oh yes, his frequency had felt off to me for several months and now I know why. And there was this whole witch hunt between like 14 people based on something I knew wasn't true. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. This is how groupthink works. This is how, so that was actually a really good moment for me to experience, because it made me go, oh, okay, great. So anyone else who is trying to convince a bunch of people about a thing that they don't actually know, I'll just be very wary of it, and I'll go with my own discernment, and I'll listen to my own inner compass. And also, I honestly feel a lot of that is not relevant. I think a lot of people get lost in the conspiracy stuff because they're processing fears and anxieties. And the truth is, yeah, you can watch that like a horror show 365 days a year, or what are you going to do about it? What are you contributing to the planet that's a different frequency to the one that you see out there? So I have seen some people just go down that rabbit hole, and it doesn't lead to a good place. And the Z's also said, be careful, because with conspiracy theories, there are certain things that are implanted by the groups who would like to have control of things to make you feel even more demoralized and, like you're doomed. So you start believing that stuff and you think, oh my God, well, how are we ever going to get out of it? And they're always like, just be very careful about what this does to your frequency and pay attention.
Well, it kind of does feed the entity that is the conspiracy as well, in many ways.
Yes.
Which, yeah, and I think there's this, there was a point earlier on I wanted to mention it, because the book actually, like at a certain point they talked about like COVID and how it came to be and some of those pieces. And it was, yes, potentially there's been some harm that has come from that, but don't forget that there's also like now watching out some harm that sort of happened to the people that set out with potentially some wrong intentions, and it's like there's that law of balance vibrationally that sort of comes through. And I think it's this real rub, because I think if I downstream into the conversation where we are right now is this kind of focus. The book brings us into this, hey, like you said, there's this real frequency of disempowerment versus empowerment. And it's like in your empowerment, it's like, what are you going to do? Yeah, like who are you going to be? Where are you right now? And what is the choice that you're making for what you're showing up for, how you're showing up, et cetera, so forth. And I think it always gets into this slippery place in, I find, psycho-spiritual communities where we're all focused on self-development, which is like, I'm going to focus on, and very much the name of the podcast, Inspired Evolution, is, hey, where are we headed? What frequency are we trying to carry for the light that's coming forward? Touch wood, putting it that way, right? Now, some people will say, oh, but are you dismissing all this stuff that's kind of going wrong? And it's like, well, no, not really. It's very much in awareness of what's going wrong. But back to the point we had a few points later, like maybe this book coming through at this particular time serves an anchor in your mind for what's possible, and it creates the shift through the awareness shift, right? And I think there's this some people get triggered by like, oh, like we're not looking at what's going wrong versus focusing on who there's a gray space that has its little tendrils in there. Do you see what I'm alluding to?
Yeah, I completely, I do, and I'm aware of it, and I know it, and it's interesting too, isn't it? Because even in what you just said, when someone wants to say to any of us, well, why aren't you focusing on what's going wrong? There's a righteousness that they know what's going wrong. Whereas the reality is they might be able to tell you about the 6 things that they see are going wrong, but what areas are they not focusing on where things are going wrong? You know, are they doing a complete 360, or have they made this conspiracy element their mission? And, you know, if you look at traditional, any understanding of who we are psychologically and emotionally, it's quite common and quite recorded that when we're going through something in ourselves, we will find an outer symbol to process those feelings. So they've made the point that, you know, some people who are activists in certain areas, they need to learn to balance the anger that took them in there. You know, for them to become the most effective, the anger might be an impulse for them. And maybe they're an activist in this area because of injustice they personally experienced in their childhood. So they transfer all of that rage and upset and grief, and they place it onto this other thing. And the message the Z's were talking about, you know, they said that the most effective activism will come not from throwing your emotions onto other people, because then people just feel slimed by your emotions. They can no longer rationally look at what they think about the conspiracy. What you're actually doing is hitting people over the head with your feelings, and you're dressing it up as, well, you're not paying attention to this thing. Well, are you in charge of me? Like, are you the overlord of me now? So you're saying we have to be scared of these overlords, and yet you want to be my overlord? This is all very... So there can be a real lack of zoom out around our emotions and our thoughts, and you see that playing out a lot in some of the most charged people around these topic areas. And they're very black and white. And yeah, for some of you, that might be great. You know, some of you might be wired in a very black and white way, and that's your way. So you will identify with that. And then for those of us who, like you said, we're a bit more aware of black, white, gray, and all the colors in between, black and white is not a position, it's a moment. Black and white is one moment of focus. It's not the whole reality. But you might have made that black and white moment your whole reality because that's what you're living from. So then you get angry that someone else won't live the same way. But that's not their design. That's not who they are. It's funny, the Z's said to me a few years ago, through a friend actually who was talking to them, that I can't look at the darkness for too long because it's not what I'm here for, and it doesn't do my frequency any good. So, I mean, I know people who are monitoring things that are going on in the world, and they do it brilliantly because they can do it in a completely detached way, but they will look at the data and they will look at and actually my design is something different. So I do go there. I mean, clearly I wouldn't have let a book like The Future Human happen if I wasn't willing to go there and let this go under the microscope. But I think it's also knowing what's right for your frequency. And I think some people get accused of sticking their head in the sand by people who want them to be more angry or more feeling. That might not be their way. It doesn't mean they aren't feeling something, but that might actually destroy them or take them off balance in a way that they would no longer be useful. So again, I think we have to be very careful as human beings of trying to be an overlord of someone else and decide what we, you know, trying to say to someone else, well, I think you should be doing it this way. And I think the more you evolve, the more you realize it's not for any of us to know how someone else should be doing something, because we're not inside that person and we're not inside all of their experiences, and we don't know their soul history, and we don't necessarily know their mission. The Z's say even the people you love the most in your life, you don't know them. They said, you know the aspects of them that you're allowed to know, and you connect to them energetically. But even the fact that you're connecting with them gives you a skewed perspective of who they are. Because, for example, Amrit, your beloved, who you have your kids with, she will be a very different person with everyone else in her life than she is with you. And you may know the most about her, and you maybe, but she's going to be a different person because of you. And the relationship between you and her is completely something you two birthed. It didn't exist before. It's the chemical reaction between the two of you. And so I think this is where black and white thinking starts to fall apart. Multi-dimensionality is the world that we live in. We are all multi-dimensional. We're living in a multi-dimensional world. It's why there are some people who are going, I'm so happy today, and someone else going, oh my God, I'm devastated. Those two things can be happening at the same time. And as we go through the coming decades, what the Z's have said is we are coming into a place of knowing and understanding that, which is why I think there has been such a rise in mental health awareness, mindfulness, emotional intelligence, because we have to unpick ourselves from these tight suits that we were all in as human beings. That's the first step. Which is why self-understanding is so important. Self-growth work is important because the more we start to understand who we are inside and see all the different parts of ourselves and hopefully give it more of a cohesion than it's ever had and less of a reactivity, the more we see the world the same way, the more we see other people the same way. We get out of the illusion of, oh, well, I'm really annoyed that they're having a great day. How do you know? Just because they put a smiley face on Instagram, they might be having the worst day of their life. Maybe they took that picture 3 weeks ago. Maybe everything else in their life is falling apart. So let them smile in that one moment. Great, they had a moment of happiness that day. The rest of it's miserable. We don't know what someone else is going through. And so therefore, us trying to be an overlord of anyone in our life is a huge mistake.
I couldn't help but reflect, Lee, as you were sharing with my relationship between my hey, you were talking about my relationship with my wife? No, that wasn't that. As you're reflecting on my relationship with my wife, there's this interrelational space, and it was like this very much like my relationship with the other person, and like I might know, like if I'm lucky, might 20% about her, right? But then someone else knows 5. I couldn't help but sort of, again, lean into the book and the 3 pillars kind of being people, purpose, and spirituality, and sort of extrapolate that into purpose and spirituality in terms of there's also then the incarnation that is Amrit. And because you've mentioned the word design and my design, and this person's design. And as you so poetically put, it's like, it's not that we're here to avoid things, but certain people like are designed to look at things a certain way. And that's the service they're going to play for the whole.
Yeah.
And then sort of looking at that and kind of going, my interrelational design with life itself, right? Like I think there's such a repositioning that the book does for people in the future human by ways of, even if we could just start with use the word overlord a couple of times, and these structures, like they don't really kind of exist. The book sort of points out in some ways, but we sort of handed over our power to the illusion that some of these do, and in some instances where they do pardon me, they're like that's yesteryear. That's very much yesteryear, and it's like this real call to like coming back into right relation with people, yes, but then also the purpose and spirituality piece around how we interface with life and our gifts and our design, and how it sort of needs to, but is in being invited to dance as it's going forward, and potentially some of the stuff that's effervescing to the surface that is no longer in service is calling us back into reclaiming that power.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up, and also it's interesting, something you said that has come up over the years is they explain that the people who are sometimes the most activist are people who sat on the other side of the table with the very people they're opposing in a prior life. So the people who are great at going, they're a dictator, because they were there. They were in the room with this person in another lifetime. They're not scared of them. That person doesn't intimidate them the way the behavior might intimidate someone else, or the lack of knowledge someone else might have around that kind of behavior would make that person really hard to be in the room with. So the whistleblowers, the ones who are calling out that behavior, that is their design. And they are fulfilling their promise to the planet by doing that. And then on a spiritual level, you can take it back even more realms and you can say, well, the people who are the chaos agents, they are also fulfilling their design. It doesn't mean you might like their design as much as, the one who you see as helping clean up what they're doing, but we're all here replaying certain cycles together. And so, the piece that you said about, I might know my wife 20% and someone else might know them 5%. This is one of the beautiful things about connection for all of us. The Z's have said we are becoming a society who more and more, they talk about the romantic relationship and how much, how limited we have been trained as a society around that. How we have been asked to put all our eggs in the romantic relationship basket. And this is where you can safely express your love. And this should be the most important person in your world, which actually is dangerous because they might be the most important person in your world. And that's okay. You can have that truth, but also recognize there are so many other beloveds all over the planet. And that's actually the place we need to get to. It won't take away the desire or the necessity for people to have a companion, a one-on-one companion, or, some people now are in 3-person relationships, and that's like a new evolution that's happening for a certain group of people. It's not that those will go away, but that our conditioned mind and our conditioned responses around how we are allowed to love, who we are allowed to love, there shouldn't be conditions on love in that way. Love is a force that connects us all, and it's a web that we're all in. And so anyone who is trying to organize, control, or infiltrate the way you love is going against spirituality. And often they will say they're doing it on behalf of spirituality. You see this in some religious cultures where people want to say what's right and what's wrong. And it's always interesting to me that they are using a very, very old text that they have often they haven't investigated how it was doctored, who it was doctored by, why it was doctored. It's not that there aren't beautiful truths in those texts, but if you're using those texts to put cages around people, you should be a bit more responsible and really investigate why. Why do I want to believe this fundamentalism? Why is that in me? Why is this either this text or the person who has taught me this text? Why is that the way I'm now going into the world? Because often people will use a text or a rule or a belief as justification for their behavior, but it's their behavior that is the potential issue, not what the book said. Because I have religious friends who are so loving and so wonderful, and I've had some religious friends who have that element, but they also decide that a certain other religious group shouldn't exist or shouldn't be alive, or this is how you're supposed to love, and it's man and woman, and it's about procreation. And I'm like, it's not just about procreation. I never believed that. I thought there's so much more to life than just making a baby. And so therefore, if that's their argument as to why there can't be same-sex relationships, they should go and do some historical research about, the further back you go in time, things were a bit more fluid. And to me, that's got nothing to do with the act of sex. It's got to do with connection. It's got to do with the fluidity of connection between people that we have been removed from. And we've been given these organized boxes that many of us have grown up through and lived with. And there are beautiful things to be found in our boxes. You can find incredible heart-opening experiences in those boxes, but there is also something beyond those boxes. And I think that's what more people are exploring now than ever before.
Inspired Soul, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Join in on the conversation. What are you taking away from today's podcast? There is so much in here. My goodness, the future human, vibrational awareness, energy updates, Man, Lego's, I'm so grateful to have him on the podcast, and I know many of you love him as well, so he's likely to be back on the podcast in the future as well. So if you've got questions for him, leave them in the comments below, and anything that you're taking away, I'd love to hear from you. What's your biggest takeaway? Leave that in the comments below as well. And for now, back to Lee. Yeah, okay, so I'm surprised we've made it this far into the conversation without talking about the heart, because it's a real grounded place to come into in and around all the work. I mean, in one of, I think it was yourself and Amelia that were talking about 2025 being the year of mastery, or it was yourself and Pam. And like 2025 is very much this year of mastery. And I think the conversation thus far is like alluding to just, the empowerment that's coming through and sort of, like you said, mental health, emotional states and awareness, like really coming to some level of individual mastery so that we can learn to navigate these times. And there seems to be this sort of call back into the energetic structure of the heart. Now, I'm just going to riff a few things at you and hopefully we can sort of orient ourselves around a conversation, because I've heard from other spiritual teachers that we're kind of going through this collective shift at the moment from solar plexus to heart chakra as a collective, in terms of we're going from these powers, like a very different sort of power structure to a very different sort of power structure internally and collectively on the planet. And then also a few parts of the disease, like I think Emilio asked a question about the throat, Pam asked a question about the crown. And so I think there's a few things in and around there in terms of we're coming into the heart, but also like it's in some ways, I think the Z said it's actually more about the crown at certain times and it's filtering down. And that opening up is then allowing us to sort of anchor into the heart, and the throat's kind of being upgraded on the way through there. I mean, there's these energetic centers in our body. There does seem to be like a drastic shift as we started the podcast, unprecedented time of change. Your awareness in and around these energetic centers for the individuals and the collective and what's going on?
It's interesting you bring up the solar plexus and the stomach. So I know this will be airing in April, right? And I just recorded yesterday the April energy update, and one of the themes referred to the solar plexus and how in April the solar plexus and stomach issues might show up for people. So the solar plexus can relate to stomach issues, digestive issues. What are we having trouble digesting? Which I think, for many looking at the world, it's a lot to digest. And I don't think many of us want to digest all the things that we're seeing. Because that's the other thing that's important. And I brought this up with Pam. I think just because you may have known that these times of transformation were coming, it doesn't mean you're not knocked around as you go through it. Even if you're someone who's been, I've heard people go, I've been waiting for this time for 30 years and I've known it was coming. And that's knowing, that's like mental. But the actual experience of being knocked around through all of this is quite visceral for all of us. And the solar plexus, relates to will, identity, power. And so the theme that was coming up around this in April, a couple of the themes related to who are you now and who are we now? And most of us, at least for some part of our day or week, are disoriented. And we're supposed to be. And there can be a part of you that goes, oh, why do I feel disoriented? And the Z's actually said in my portal broadcast that I did last week, my live with all my members, that many of us are floating above our bodies, but we don't realize we are. That in this time, a lot of us are floating somewhere just outside our bodies, and it's not because we're avoiding or because we've hooked out, or it's actually a natural state, but it does mean that many of us are feeling perhaps less grounded or less practical or less connected to old things on earth that we used to be, because as we go through this raise in consciousness, energetically, that's what's happening to a lot of us. We're being lifted up and out. And then as you pointed out at the very beginning of this conversation, then sometimes we're slammed back down into the body and we're like sludging for a few days going, oh my God, what's this? So I think to your point, when they speak about the crown and when they speak about the heart, whenever they speak about the heart and the crown, they always point out the throat, which is here too. And of course, you've got the third eye as well, which is visioning, it's seeing. It's also, this is what can connect us to telepathy and psychic knowing, which was another theme that came up in the April energy update, which, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know me, I put those out for free on YouTube at the beginning of every month, usually about 25-30 minutes, talking about usually 8 themes that I'm given to report on for the month. And who are we now? Who are you now? And that being a question for you, that is part of the process. But where the crown is opening, where the heart is opening, we'll speak our truth more. We'll say things that we previously didn't say. And if you aren't someone who's big on words or speaking, you will be doing it through action. You'll be changing your actions. You'll be changing your behaviors. And one of the things about the crown opening that the Z's have spoken about, which I think is an interesting element to bring in, is our cosmic consciousness. We can have a heart consciousness as a human. We can have a consciousness of love in the way we behave or the way we feel, or there might be practices we each do that make us get into that more expanded space. And you go, oh, I'm feeling more in my heart and I'm feeling more open. But they say that we're coming into a time of cosmic consciousness, which is understanding our place in the universe, understanding we are part of a very big whole, and that to some degree we've been quarantined from that knowledge for a long time. And we've been tucked away from our awareness of our position in the universe, not our position on Earth. And of course, there are many brilliant people who've been ringing that bell for a long time, holding open the knowledge for us of, no, we're not the only life form here in the universe. There's a lot, and they've been holding that flag for a long time. But we're coming into a period where all that starts to get increasingly disclosed, which I think is why, honestly, I think that's why you're seeing more people opening up to their own psychic abilities and their own intuition. Doesn't mean they're all going to become, they're all going to do it for a job. I think the increase in those of us out there who do this kind of work for work is by design. I think it's because we're at a time where more of this needs to be an example, so that we just become a more intuitive world. Again, not that people have to become a channeler or anything like that, but this is a part of our sensory awareness that we've been discouraged away from for various reasons or for different reasons, and it's coming back in force.
Yeah, there's this a question I had for you today in regards to the multi-dimensionality, and I think the Z's at some point referenced it as hyperdimensionality, and I was like, wow! Is this piece around are we almost kind of already post-human? Like, because humus is very earth and matter, and I know we're bound to Gaia and her transformation, but as we're stepping into these more vibrational awarenesses and understandings and our multidimensional nature, are we kind of already slipping into this post-human phase?
It depends what you think a human is. So, one of the most powerful experiences of my life was, for many different reasons, but I'm going to focus on one aspect of the experience. I was there with a man who died very suddenly, very unexpectedly, and there were a small group of us working on his body to try and recuperate him. Well, it was actually about 15 of us, I think. And it was clear he wasn't going to come back. And at one point during this process, I remembered that I could channel. And I was like, oh, hang on a second. Yes, you've got people giving him CPR. You've got people doing Reiki. I was energetically trying to, help his body. But then I suddenly thought, no, talk to his soul. And his soul was way above his body, and it was orange. It was very, very orange. And he didn't want to come back. He was like, no, this is great. This is amazing here. He did not want to come back. But what I remember about his body was unrecognizable, and partly because of what he'd just been through. But it was more than that. What I saw was, the human body is a gravity suit. What actually makes us human is the soul and the way that we animate the gravity suit. One of the reasons I think models are chosen to be models is they're very good at stillness. So we look at their structure, we look at their body. Models are very good at containing energy, and also they have to feel something for people to be magnetized to there. But they're very good at containing, not necessarily animating, because if there's too much soul or personality animation, we don't look at the body. And, a model's job is often to represent a body in many ways. Of course, they're representing a feeling as well, so it's an arguable thing, what I just said. But what really hit me was, wow, the soul is what made him him. And the way he animated is what made him him. Because now I see him still and gone. There is no energy there anymore. It's just this gravity suit that he was wearing, that we all wear, that you and I are wearing right now. And the minute we're gone, our bodies are going to look kind of weird, because it won't feel like Amrit and Lee. You'll go, oh yeah, that looked like the body they were in, but it won't feel like us, because it's our energy that's actually animating it. So I think, or I feel, that any of us who look into what's beyond the human, or what's beyond the story we've been sold about humanity. We're already living multidimensionally. So therefore, if the next level is going even beyond it, and I'd never heard them use the term hyperdimensionality before, that was new to me. So that whole thing was an interesting next layer. They've been talking about multidimensionality for over 20 years. So I can't even remember what your question was, but for some reason I wanted to share what I shared, because I think we're increasingly aware that our energy and our soul is incredible, but we haven't really been asked to look at that.
Yeah, my question was around, are we post-human already? And you poetically went into this space of defining what it even means to be human, and understanding our energy and our soul. So,
And what your belief is maybe around a human. Because, one person will go, well, to be a human, you have a house and you have a job and you might get married and you might have kids and then you're going to die. And that might be their understanding, which is quite animalistic, really. Nothing wrong with it, but it's kind of what we've been taught. And then there are many others who are like, wow, this is trippy. I'm in a gravity suit and there are stars and I'm on a planet and it's what? I mean, okay, sure, I'll deal with taxes and I'll care about the things you're telling me to care about, but can we all just take a minute here and go, holy cow, this is quite an experience. and how often are we, it's not like our teachers on day one of school went, you're human, isn't that amazing? Yeah, we didn't have that. We're like, okay, let's learn about something that happened 400 years ago and here's history about it, and and often what we learn is the history was edited. The history is that here's the story we as a culture would like to tell you about that time that we did terrible things to another country, but we're going to make it look like it was them. It's, when you actually dig into the education that's going on, you're like, oh, that's interesting choice. So to me, I think spiritual people are post-human, if human means what you're told a human is in traditional mainstream programming. And then, of course, there are cultures and tribes and countries where that honoring and reverence of the soul and the multidimensionality is there from day one, and they've kept that alive and they've held that, and sometimes at great costs and sometimes at great pains, because they haven't been allowed to, or other people have tried to stop them, other countries or other cultures, or
that's a huge point. There's this conversation that continuously emerges about this timeline split, and we mentioned timelines earlier in the conversation. I saw very much as you were describing this potentiality tree, almost like this quantum potential field of like what opens up into the future, and certain things get activated and certain things don't, depending on various variables. But there seems to be this this awareness around where potentially, and I find it hard having this conversation on my podcast at times, because the idea of a split implies less unity in some ways, right? And if I had to rebrand spirituality, which it doesn't need to be rebranded, but if I could, I just sort of offer up the word unity, right? It's just like, there you go. But then there is very much this awareness collectively that there is this split that's coming. Your awareness in and around that, what does that split mean to yourself in terms of, are there people that are doing the work, transforming and moving into certain spaces? And maybe if I can pull in a thread from the book, there's like this awareness around like the 8% potentially, like, creates a shift. So I wanted to sort of feel into that.
It's an interesting thing. And I remember many years ago hearing from other sources, you'd hear this phrase, splitting of the worlds. And I would be like, oh, that's interesting. And I didn't, at the time I didn't like overly look into it, but I would hear it. So there are two ways to look at, well, it's interesting. You talked about the split, which to me tends to infer one group go over there and one group go over there, right? For me,
what it feels like.
Yeah. And there are many people who are positioning it that way. For me, it's not that simple. I think it's that there are, 80 groups, and you might characterize 20 of those groups as quite a similar vibration. You might go, oh yeah, that 20 of those groups are quite similar. They're trying to defend something old, and because that's the existence they're from. And instead of just living that life, they want to tell everyone else they should be living that way as well. They want to, they've got the war culture in them, the overlord culture, which is, I will tell you how to live your life, rather than go, oh, this is interesting. There's an evolution in this time that I'm alive in, and there are things happening that I don't recognize, or that my parents didn't recognize or train me to recognize, but let's have a look at it, you know? So for me, the splitting of the world is a little bit like multiple dimensions happening at once, multiple dimensions of reality. And where I go back to with it is, you can have a row of houses on a street, and let's say there are 10 houses on a street, and there are families who are living, you know, a meter away from another family through a wall. They can't see what's going on in that house. So in a way, they don't think they're in the energy field of this other group right next door to them. But one house is really happy, and they have a beautiful, you know, kind of way of looking out for each other, uplifting each other. The house next door might be really lonely and quite sad, and they're right next to each other through a wall. So I'm always reminded that someone we're standing right next to can be having an awful day while we're having a good day, or vice versa. And so for me, the splitting of the worlds, how I've come to see it play out right now, is I think there are many people who are living dimensionally, working with energy, working with vibration, which gives them a very different experience of what's going on to the people who either don't experience that, don't buy into it, and you normally don't buy into something because you haven't experienced it. It's why I always say there's no point in forcing your belief on someone else. People believe what they experience, what they know, what they see. So for me, that's where the splitting is true. I don't see it as one group and another group. And I think that why we might sometimes perceive it that way is our mainstream culture is still very much good side, bad side, good guy, bad guy, winner, loser, which is duality. Multi-dimensionality is not duality. There will be dualistic moments. There will be dualistic thoughts or feelings in moments of, you know, when you're in this area of a dimension, but then you can shift. So for me, the splitting of the worlds is not so A-B, but I am definitely seeing an increasing, I don't even want to say gap between people's realities. I think people are becoming more firmly who they're here to be, and the contrast is getting clearer, and the contrast is actually being revealed to us in a way it never has. The underpinnings of our system and our power systems are no longer underpinnings. They're beginning to become very visible to people, and so it's quite shocking or quite jarring, because you go, oh my God, is this what's... Well, that's what's always been going on, actually. It's just that we're at a point where it's surfacing more, because you can no longer hide the shadow in the way that you could.
Yeah, the underpinnings piece reminds me of just one point I was hoping to chat to you about, even if it's briefly today, was there's this piece about leadership in the book around vibrational ethics, which I'd never really heard of it put that way before. And sort of alluding to, and not to sort of poo-poo stuff, but there's like, you know, the current leadership structures that we have don't really carry an awareness of vibrational ethics, you know, and even just this this cyclical model of like leadership is like, you know, there are other structures out there where people come into power and they leave power knowing that, you know, they're only meant to be in power for a little bit because it's a burden that you carry in some ways, and a responsibility that you carry, and too much of it, you know, is a certain way. And, you know, recognizing that, and what dropped in for me, which wasn't a timeline, that was like every 2 years, you know, things shifting and changing and like coming in and then also grooming the next. And I mean, that sort of coupled with this real piece that was in the book, which I guess we probably don't have too much time to talk about today, which is the wisdom keeper piece, you know, like there's these few really big themes in the book. Like for me, I remember growing up in a migrant family here in Australia, and my dad didn't have Google. Yeah. So he would be spending hours on the phone whilst he was working, or to his mum, just chatting, you know, my son's doing this, my son's doing that. He's learnt this and he's learnt that. And she's like, oh, you know, I remember like I had this big thing at something like made a poultice. I don't know for those that know what a poultice is, but like it helped heal something. like on my knee at the time, and it was just this. It really helped, and it was full of herbs and stuff, and it was pulling out like all the heat and the inflammation, and it worked wonders. I mean, I'm looking at my kids, and already like I disenfranchised from my parents in some way. Like I ask Google stuff. Yeah, I'm asking ChatGPT stuff on how to. So there's this disconnect between the elders and also the sea of information that the younger generation's in, and and then there's this vibrational ethics piece around leaders and just the way we navigate information. And I think there's this real homecoming to like an understanding of vibration and I guess right relation, right place. I mean, I don't want to sound like we're on a soapbox here, but there's some really big themes in there. And I mean, even just the vibrational leadership piece was huge for me to start to like land into in terms of, because I think with leadership, we land into this space of we can see what's not working, but we're not entirely aware of what potentially could be. Right. But leaning into that, it's sort of prescribed like, oh, yes, but can you see at the heart of it, the leaders that you currently have vibrationally aren't considering what's happening to you as a vibration. And there's that vibrational ethics piece. And then, yeah, so that was a huge piece for me.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing. And also, I love what you said. I love that you brought in the wisdom keepers because that's been a really interesting thing for me. They've spoken about this for a few years, and they went into detail about it in the book too. I remember when I was kind of coming up 20 years ago, very much an avid student of self-growth and spirituality. And there would be this statement that I would hear from time to time that just was weird to me. And I didn't know why it was weird, and I couldn't put my finger on what about it felt untrue, but it always felt untrue. It would be when you would hear people who were, 55 and above, who were spiritual, saying, oh, the next generation, they're the crystal children and they're going to save us. And I would find it, okay. And I think there's a couple of things going on there. I think we have been trained to look for a savior outside ourselves. I think we as a society are we've disenfranchised our elders. There's an invisibility and an irrelevance that is often hoisted on our elders, which is very interesting, isn't it, when you look at how old most people in leadership are. So it's interesting that, you look at governments around the world and there's a lot of older people in leadership positions and less room for the young, actually. And yet in our society, the way that our culture has been set up, apart from, again, in certain cultures where they do revere their elders and it's very woven in, there is a kind of redundancy for people as they get older. And yet what the Z's say is the wisdom keepers are the ones who have been alive for decades on the planet. And like a great tree that has seen it all, felt it all, been there through it all, they have this innate wisdom because they know the cycles. They know the cycles of life. They have gone through different seasons in their own body and their own awareness. And of course, you can have, you can have beautiful old souls who are 20, and you can have crotchety, shut down 80-year-olds or 70-year-olds who, haven't opened to themselves. So they're not necessarily going to be the one you want to go to for advice. And that's okay. That's their path. But what they were saying was, don't abandon the young. If you're older, don't just assume it's all on their shoulders. Don't go, oh, well, they're faster than we were. Well, yes, but the only reason the young are evolved compared to prior generations is because of how each generation paves the way for the next. So don't disconnect from them. And of course, there is a time in every young person's life where they disconnect from authority and, they start, especially, in the teens and perhaps the early 20s, there is a need to prove yourself, fend for yourself, perhaps be less open to older people. And that's a rite of passage for many. But when you get beyond that, the elders are really the wisdom keepers for the younger generation. And so they talk about there needing to be more of a fusion between those two. And I guess where I relate to it is I always had older friends, always. Like, I even to this day, I'm 48 right now, and some of my closest friends are in their 70s. And that age gap has always been in my life. I've always gravitated to older people because they are wisdom keepers. And I think that's amazing. It's lovely to be with someone who knows more than you do in a certain area or in a certain way. It's a gift. It's a gift that you get to receive and be party to. And for them, that's also their path. So I say all of this and I feel for the people who do feel disenfranchised. I feel for the older people who do maybe sit here and listen to this and go, yeah, well, I'm not really that connected to many young people anymore, or my grandkids don't really want me right now because they're busy off doing their own lives. But it's not just about who we're related to. And I'm actually hearing through my own portal community and places where this messaging has come through the Z's, I'll see the comments from people and it's beautiful. You'll see, like I remember one very specifically, there's a woman, she said, yeah, I'm 75 and I've been grieving my husband the last few years. And after I listened to this channel, I went off and decided to volunteer at my local community center. And I've been doing that now 3 afternoons a week. And I love it. And actually one of the other volunteers is 22 and she's going through a real hard time and she didn't have a good mother. And I've been able to kind of mother her. And it's been great for both of us. And so what I loved about that was, yeah, it just reminds any of us, okay, we might feel disenfranchised today. How are we going to change it? What can we do? How can we take that 10-minute walk around the block that's a step in the direction of positive action? It's not a radical overhaul in 24 hours that you're just not ready for because you're still a bit depressed or you're still a bit whatever. But how can we vibrationally start to steer ourselves towards what would bring more light and more connection to our life? Because the one thing I'm very aware of is, at the root of depression, grief, it's different maybe, but this is in grief too, is disconnection. When we feel shut down or pulled back, there is a disconnection. Now, some people have chemical issues that lead them to depression, and so we can't not acknowledge that. But the state of depression makes you want to disconnect. So even if disconnection is not what led you to depression, that is an experience in depression, and that's what's difficult about it, because you want to connect to something. You might not like people, but you might love animals, you might like nature, you might like gardening, and if gardening is like the place that you feel the most connected, it's going to really bother you that you haven't gardened for 3 weeks if there's no other replacement in your life that makes you feel connected to something, which goes back to one of the, as you said, one of the 3 pillars in the book.
Lee, I feel like I could talk to you forever, and I want to keep talking to you forever. You're coming to Australia though, which is a bonus. So we get to see you shortly. Maybe you can tell us a little bit. You've mentioned the portal. There's an online community there. You're coming to Australia for a little bit.
Yes.
There's some magic brewing. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what's coming up in your world, just to sort of inspire us on for those that want to continue the conversation with Lee.
I would love to. So I came to Australia in 2012 and 2016 to run workshops. I love the Australian people. And I had a lot of one-on-one clients back when I did personal sessions. I always, the people in Australia are really incredible. And so I was supposed to come in 2020, and we all know what happened there. We were just beginning to plan it as COVID hit. We were going to be there at the end of 2020. So I'm really thrilled to be coming back. And also we're going to do New Zealand, which I have never even visited, let alone brought my work to. So we start in Auckland, and then we go through Byron Bay, Brisbane, Adelaide, Sydney, and Melbourne. I think I haven't missed one. And we're basically bringing the Big Love Tour, which is it's a 3.5 hour experience with a 30-minute interval. I wanted to combine different elements of my work. So being an energy intuitive, working with each city I go to and each audience we work with, there are themes specific to that audience that begin the night. So much like an energy update that's tailored to everyone in the room, I bring in the 3 themes that I get an hour or 2 before they all arrive. So we look at those, I take questions and answers, I channel, I lead a guided meditation, I lead people through a channeling exercise, and we weave music through the whole night. So myself and Devor Bozique, we create music and have been for many, many years. So it's a real rounded experience that's designed to uplift, inspire, and heal. Actually, a lot of people have releases in the room, and of course we laugh, because laughter is what makes the medicine go down in every area of life. So we're bringing it to New Zealand and Australia, having taken it across North America and Europe. So we can't wait for that. And it begins on, I believe it's mid-April. I can't remember the exact date, and it runs through to about May 2nd. So all details are at my website for that, leeharrisenergy.com. And if you go to the events page, you'll find it there. Some shows are sold out, but we still have availability in a lot of the shows. And then we're doing a week-long retreat called Soul Magic in La Jolla, which is right by San Diego in California. And Soul Magic is a 6-day immersion into energy mastery teachings, which is, really what I teach. It's teaching us how to become a better energy master of ourselves, not to become like someone else, but to become more who we are and what our mission is. And so it's very personalized in that way. So that will be happening in the second week of July in La Jolla, San Diego. And then for anyone who can't get to a live event, my next big online course is called Next Level Healer. And I'm teaching that over 2 weekends. And that's specifically for people who work in the healing arts, whether you're, a healer, or whether you're doing something like this kind of podcast, you want to bring illumination and inspiration to the world. The core issues that many of us go through, it's, everything from scarcity issues through to fear of persecution, through to fear of visibility, through to, blocking the flow coming through you because of ideas about who you are. So I'm going to be doing a 2-weekend deep dive with people on those energetics. That came to me really strongly as we did the tour. So yeah, those are just a few of the things I have coming up.
Just a few of the things.
The next 3-4 months anyway.
My goodness, thank you so much for what you're doing for us, collectively as well, and sharing your time and energy so abundantly here with us today, Lee.
Thank you for having me.
I mean, it's obvious that this is your life's work. I mean, there's so much in there, like, your journey through, acting, and then finding your way into like personal development and the school, and it's just like how it's all bloomed and blossomed over the years. Just tracking the journey is really incredible. That there's definitely off the beaten path. There are some really, really beautiful marigolds we get to pick along the side, and just the work that you continue to do inspires so many. And like I've said to you, there's been this real awareness of your work. People that watch the channel reflect on Lee and the work there as well. So it's been some time in the works to have this conversation. I feel really, really grateful that we've had it. And I mean, what a beautiful time. I'll also put a link to everything we've discussed today, but then also the link to the book, Future Human, in the show notes below as well, for people to go check out, because I think it is a pertinent time, and I think we can all kind of feel it in our bones that things are rapidly shifting. I mean, we didn't even really get to discuss the fact that it's almost April this year. Like, where did the last 2 weeks, 4 months go? It's just been an incredible time. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and the way that you're carrying it for, so many of us around here at this particular time.
And thank you for holding. It's you're such an easy person to have a conversation with, and I really like the things you pick up on. So thank you also for what you do. And thanks for your thanks, but I know I'm supposed to do this. I didn't always, but I've been doing it 21 years now, so I know this is why I'm here. So I'm grateful to be able to do it.
You inspired soul, you made it through to the end of another incredible episode. I mean, Lee Harris, Inspired Evolution, what touch wood. It was such a blessing to have him on. And guys, if you did really like this video, don't forget to like it, give it a thumbs up. And I want to take a moment to thank all of you that are subscribed to this channel. Everything you see around here, guests like Lee, absolutely everything is powered and empowered by your subscription to this channel. Cannot thank you enough for your incredible love and support and belief in everything that we're up to here in the world together. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please hit that button, hit the bell notification icon, and join the movement championing love, positivity, and wisdom around the planet. Now, if you love this conversation with Lee, you're absolutely going to love this episode on screen for you to continue your inspired evolution onwards, upwards, and inwards. So go on, take your pick of any of these three and make your click, and I'll see you in the next one. Go on, I'll see you there.